Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I used to say I lived life to the fullest, though in practice that meant an endless parade of nightclubs, casual hookups, and emotional detachment. From early on, I recognized my temperament wasn't suited for lasting relationships. My folks, straight-laced New Englanders with traditional values, always hoped I'd follow their well-worn path. College, steady career, marriage, kids, a home in the suburbs. But I craved freedom and unpredictability, which is probably why I chose to keep everything superficial. I never considered myself cruel, just trying to avoid unnecessary drama and disappointment. If a woman and I were on the same wavelength, fun without promises, I saw nothing wrong with living in the moment. During the week, I worked as an assistant at a logistics company in Boston. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and let me save enough for Friday and Saturday nights out. I lived alone in a small apartment in an area with easy access to the city's nightlife districts. My routine was predictable. Wake up early, brave the crowded subway, sit at my desk until closing time, and when Friday rolled around, rush home for a quick shower, throw on something fashionable, and head out to meet my friends at some bar or club. I never completely took pride in my behavior, but I didn't feel guilty either. They were passing adventures, dance floor kisses, lingering glances across beer-filled tables. Occasionally, someone would be interested in extending the night at a hotel or my apartment. I always made the rules crystal clear. I didn't want anything serious, wasn't planning to get attached, and always insisted on protection. If she wasn't comfortable with that, I preferred to end the conversation right there. Some understood and we got along fine. Others got upset and labeled me cold-hearted. You only live in the now, my older sister would say whenever we met at family gatherings. Sooner or later, you'll regret not putting down roots. I pretended not to care, telling myself those were just the words of someone who chose a different lifestyle. My freedom mattered more, at least. That's the story I told myself. One Friday in autumn of 2011, as the workday wound down, my colleague Jason, who also enjoyed the nightlife scene, invited me to check out a new place. According to him, it was a recently opened bar with a dance floor in a neighborhood popular with the after-dark crowd. I didn't need much convincing. I left work, swung by my apartment for a shower, picked out a button-down shirt, and drove there. We agreed to meet at the entrance around 10 o'clock. I felt that familiar mix of excitement and curiosity that always came with discovering a new night spot. The anticipation of the music, the people, and the possibilities of casual encounters. I arrived before Jason and positioned myself near the door while waiting. The facade was understated, but I could hear the vibrant sound pulsing from the speakers inside. I greeted the bouncer, who checked my ID and collected the cover charge. Shortly after, Jason appeared, energetic as always, wearing jeans and an eye-catching shirt. "Hope tonight's going to be good," he said as we walked to the bar. "I heard this place has been packed for weeks." I ordered a beer, and we surveyed our surroundings. Pulsating lights, industrial-style decor with exposed concrete walls, people conversing on sofas, others letting loose on the dance floor to the gentle electronic beat. There was hardly any empty space in the room. After finishing our first drinks, we decided to circulate. I moved across the dance floor, swaying to the rhythm of the music. That's when I noticed a woman staring at me from the other side, near one of the speakers. She had a commanding presence, the kind you notice without trying. Dark hair, fair skin, medium height, slender build. Her gaze made me uncomfortable because it was hard to read her expression. A slight smile mixed with something indefinable. I pretended not to notice at first, but Jason caught on. "That woman over there hasn't stopped looking at you," he murmured near my ear, pointing discreetly. "Either you make a move or I will. Decide quickly." I laughed and joked that I might think about it, but I had already made up my mind. I was going to talk to her. I approached, feigning nonchalance, and waved. "Hi," I greeted her. "Looks like you're enjoying the night too. Is this your first time here?" She smiled faintly and responded calmly. "Yes, I'm discovering the city's bars. I moved here recently." The way she spoke conveyed confidence. I asked her name and she replied, "My name is Victoria." I told her mine, and for a few moments we just looked at each other, enveloped by the rhythm of the music. Then I invited her to dance. I felt her eyes scanning me from head to toe before she responded. Finally, she agreed with a slight nod. We danced without saying much. It was a physical interaction. She would move closer, occasionally resting her hand on my shoulder or sliding it along my arms. Meanwhile, I experienced a mix of attraction and caution, perhaps because Victoria didn't seem like someone who was easily charmed. Still, the conversation flowed when we took breaks to catch our breath at the bar. I ordered a drink for her and a beer for myself. Gradually, I realized that Victoria said little about herself, but asked many questions about me, where I worked, what I did on weekends, if I had a girlfriend or children. I was honest. I told her I worked at a company, and that when it came to relationships, I never made commitments. Hearing this, she flashed an enigmatic smile, saying she had expected as much. "I'm not naive," she commented, "so I can imagine you're the type who likes to live in the moment." I smiled back. The conversation drifted toward movies, music, and the city. It was easy to talk to her, though there was constant tension. At the end of the night, when the bar was starting to empty, I suggested we go to my apartment. She looked at me for a few seconds before accepting. In the car, I made my lifestyle clear, attempting not to sell any false illusions. I don't normally get involved. If we hook up tonight, it doesn't mean we're dating. I just want everything to be transparent, okay? And I always insist on using protection. I hope you're not looking to have kids anytime soon. I said this almost mechanically, having repeated this speech countless times to other women. Some found it amusing, others were offended. Victoria, however, showed no discomfort. She just nodded silently. We spent the night together. It was intense and physical, but there were no declarations of love at dawn. When daylight broke, she studied me with a serious expression. "Do you do this with all of them?" "With all who accept," I responded frankly. "I don't deceive anyone." She nodded but seemed displeased. Nevertheless, she appeared to understand and soon got dressed. We didn't exchange contacts, and I didn't even consider asking for her number. Given my history, this would just be another night that would become a memory. When I returned to the office on Monday, I was called to my boss's office, a man in his early 50s with whom I'd always maintained a cordial professional relationship. "Mark," he began, using my name, "we're getting a new analyst in our department. I want you to train her. I want her to shadow your work and learn about the system you operate." I agreed, even enthusiastic about the chance to demonstrate my skills. However, when my boss introduced the new employee, I felt as if my stomach had dropped. It was Victoria. She feigned surprise, but I noticed her gaze had something calculated about it. Still, she spoke politely. What a coincidence, right? I was speechless in that moment. My boss didn't notice anything strange, but I feared she might tell someone about our night together. After we were alone, I got straight to the point. "Victoria, please, let's be discreet. What happened on Friday, well, it was a casual encounter. I had no idea you'd be working here. How did you get this job so quickly?" She looked at me inscrutable. I had been researching this company for months and sent my resume long before we met. "Do you really think everything revolves around you?" "Relax. I'm not interested in causing trouble. It was pure coincidence." Or not, although that sounded partly convincing, something in me didn't relax. A coincidence like this, I wasn't 100% sure it was just random chance, but I continued training her, explaining systems, answering questions. She paid attention, asked relevant questions, noted everything in a notebook. Her behavior was exemplary, so I tried not to create paranoia. Until the following Friday, after work, when she approached my desk with 2 disposable cups of coffee. "Brought this for you," she said, handing me one of them. I thanked her, but suddenly I remembered a warning my grandmother had given me since childhood. Never accept food or drink from someone you don't trust. She wasn't a person who distrusted without reason. She believed strongly in jealousy and things that defied logical explanation. I remembered this, and as a precaution, when Victoria wasn't around, I threw the coffee away. I felt a bit foolish, but I preferred not to risk it. Later that same night, I met up with Jason and a group of friends at a different bar. I was already on the dance floor when I spotted a young woman standing near the wall, clearly uncomfortable in that environment. She was pretty, but in a delicate way. I used to easily notice who seemed out of place, because many of my conquests started that way. I would approach someone less accustomed to the world of loud music, alcohol, and excited people. This time, however, something made me hesitate. The young woman, who I later discovered was named Emma, had an aura of sweetness that didn't match my usual pursuit of fun. Perhaps out of curiosity, I found a way to start a conversation. I said something trivial about the music being too loud. She smiled shyly, agreeing. We talked about the heat, about the difficulty of finding a quiet place. I asked if she frequented bars like this often, and she shook her head. "It's not my habit. I only came because a friend insisted, but she ended up leaving early. I think I'm without a ride now." I offered to take her home whenever she wanted, and she accepted hesitantly. We started talking more deeply, and I noticed that Emma was almost the opposite of the women I usually met. She had a serene gaze, a soft way of speaking, and displayed a sincerity that made me uncomfortable, as if I needed to be careful not to break that almost innocent atmosphere. For the first time in many years, I felt I needed to explain who I was, but in a more human way. I didn't want to ruin whatever impression she might have of me. We spent a lot of time talking near the bar, and I showed no rush to go anywhere. We danced 1 or 2 songs awkwardly, because she practically didn't know how to dance. Still, I genuinely enjoyed myself. I realized the early morning hours passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was past 2 or 3 in the morning. I offered her a ride, and she accepted. On the way, I asked if I could see her again, and she gave a delicate smile. "You can, but I need to get to know you better." When we parked in front of her building, we exchanged phone numbers. It was a simple act that seemed extraordinary to me, because I didn't usually care about asking for contact information. We also didn't kiss, which surprised me about my own behavior. It was as if I wanted to do everything in the most correct way, not rushing things, respecting Emma's reserved nature. The following week, while training Victoria at work, I thought more and more about Emma. I would send her messages during lunch breaks, call her at night to arrange something. I realized I no longer had much interest in going out with my friends to clubs. Emma preferred simple activities, watching streaming movies, walking in a park, having coffee at a cozy cafe. And strangely, I loved every second in her company. The change this caused in my life was enormous. My colleagues were surprised to learn that I had settled down. Within a few months, I committed to a serious relationship with Emma. The first time I had used that word in many years. My parents were happy when they found out, and I even risked bringing Emma to a family lunch. She was well received. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly and promisingly. However, at the company, Victoria noticed my transformation and gradually became less friendly. She began to make ironic comments. "So you decided to become a good guy?" she would ask between chuckles. "You who defended the commitment-free life so much." I tried to maintain cordiality. On certain days, she would provoke me. "What if I tell your girlfriend that you're no good? Do you think she would stay with you?" I would counter by asking her to respect my personal life and reminding her that our night together had been consensual and honest. The situation began to spiral out of control when she hinted at revealing intimate details to our boss and other people in the company. At first, I thought she was just irritated. However, seeing the pressure increase, I decided to get ahead of it and talk to my boss. I explained that we were in personal conflict without going into specifics. He wasn't exactly surprised. He commented that he had already received complaints about Victoria for inappropriate behavior with other colleagues. Within a few days, my boss decided not to renew Victoria's contract, and she was let go. On the day she left, wearing a dark tailored suit, she gave me a look of pure resentment. As she passed by my desk, she whispered something that sent chills down my spine. "You'll regret this, Mark." I swear, under other circumstances, I would have shrugged it off, thinking they were just angry words, but for some reason, I remembered the feeling of discomfort I had when throwing away the coffee. Perhaps my grandmother had planted in me an extra dose of suspicion about jealousy, hexes, evil eyes, or maybe I was just being paranoid. The fact is, for some time, Victoria's phrase kept hammering in my head. Despite this, I continued my life alongside Emma. We were in love. She had met my parents, and we made plans together, although without rushing to get married. It was as if I had finally understood the value of something constant and true. Everything was going well until the day when Emma, apparently healthy, fainted on the street as we were returning from a park outing on a weekend. She turned pale, clutched her chest, and fell like a rag doll. I panicked, called for help, and took her to the hospital. There, the doctors said she had a heart problem. I couldn't understand. A young person with no history of disease suddenly suffering a heart attack. While we waited for more tests, she began to have dangerous arrhythmias. Her heartbeats became irregular. From one day to the next, Emma got worse, and to my horror, a massive heart attack took her from me. I can't describe what I felt. It was like being trapped in a waking nightmare. I couldn't do anything. I sat in the hospital corridor in disbelief as the medical team exited an emergency room to deliver the news. It was as if someone had pulled the ground from beneath my feet. I cried, I screamed. I rode an emotional roller coaster of guilt, anger, and helplessness. Emma's parents arrived crying, and we all hugged, not knowing exactly what to say or do. At the funeral, the atmosphere was one of profound mourning. I felt my body trembling, tears escaping without control. That's when an elderly woman approached me. She had sad but steady eyes. Only later did I realize it was Mrs. Alina, Emma's maternal grandmother. She bent down beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Something very evil was cast upon you both." She spoke with disconcerting serenity, as if she were certain of what she was saying. I tried to reject the idea immediately, but the mention of something evil reminded me of Victoria's threats. I froze. "Mrs. Alina continued, my granddaughter didn't have any disease. This wasn't just chance or a genetic problem. You messed with the wrong person, my son, and now the energy she channeled has fallen on Emma." I felt a chill run up my spine. It sounded insane, yet it echoed everything my grandmother had told me when I was younger about people who harm others through unknown rituals. Still, I argued, "Mrs. Alina, it could have been a fatality, some medical issue. I have no proof it was something supernatural." She gravely shook her head. "I'm not asking you to believe me without thinking, but I can show you some signs, and I'm certain this person hasn't stopped. If you get involved with any other woman, she will strike again until she sees you destroyed." I couldn't say anything. After the burial, I spent days in a kind of stupor. I missed work, kept my phone turned off, cried uncontrollably at night thinking about Emma. I blamed myself for not being faster, for not noticing signs. At the same time, the idea that Victoria might be behind this tormented me. As absurd as it seemed, there were coincidences that were difficult to ignore. One day, Mrs. Alina called me, saying I needed to come to her house. It wasn't far from where Emma had lived, an old house with a garden full of herbs and plants. When I arrived, she received me with gentleness, but got straight to the point. "I have prayers and rituals that can help you, but I'll only do this if you're willing to believe there are forces we don't control." I remained somewhat skeptical, but in my grief, I clung to any hope that this might somehow bring peace or even prevent future tragedies. She began to perform a kind of blessing, sprinkling water with herbs, praying softly. There was a scent of incense in the air. and although I didn't understand what she was saying, I felt a pang of relief. In the end, she explained, to completely break what has been cast, you must confront the person who generated this evil. Only then will she stop pursuing you, whether out of jealousy, anger, or passion. It wasn't easy to digest, but Mrs. Alina seemed so convinced that I agreed to follow her guidance. She asked me not to approach any other woman and to be careful about accepting drinks and food until we conducted the confrontation in a specific ritual. I left there with a mixture of fear and a slight hope that at least I would no longer be consumed by guilt. A few days passed, and during that time I returned to work. My boss, Mr. Thompson, noticed I was downcast and suggested I take some time off. But I thought it better to stay busy to avoid going completely insane. I tried not to think about Victoria, but her name continued to spin in my head. Every time I remembered her last threat, I felt chills. Mrs. Alina called me on a Monday afternoon, saying she had discovered through her intuitions and through an acquaintance who worked in the same area as Victoria that she would be performing a ritual at an isolated location on the outskirts of the city. It would be our chance to confront her away from curious onlookers. The story sounded confused, but given what I had already experienced, I didn't question more than necessary. I trusted her word. On Friday night, I headed toward the indicated location, less traveled roads with few houses around. I found Mrs. Alina leaning against her car in a dirt pullout near the shoulder of the road. She had made a small improvised altar on the hood. Candles, a jar of coarse salt, some herb branches, an image of a saint. The wind blew strongly, flickering the candle flames. I approached, feeling my heart race. "Let's prepare," she said as she drew a circle on the ground with coarse salt. "Stay inside it. Whatever happens, don't leave." I nodded nervously. I looked at my cell phone's clock. It was already past 11 at night. The place was practically deserted, with a street lamp about 100 yards away. And every now and then, a car would cut across the road at high speed. Around midnight, I finally saw headlights approaching. The car parked further ahead. Although it was dark, I could see Victoria getting out. Her face tense, her posture agitated. She walked in our direction, but hesitated upon seeing the candles and the salt circle. "What is this?" she asked, staring at us from a distance. "What are you doing, Mark?" I couldn't respond immediately. My lips dried up and my throat locked. Mrs. Alina raised her arms and began to mumble prayers in a firm, but not very loud tone. There was nothing grandiose or cinematic about it, just a strange, heavy atmosphere. Victoria took a few steps forward, and I could see in her countenance a mixture of anger and fear. She was holding something in her hand, a small box that, we would later learn, contained personal items she would use in her ritual. "You're crazy, Mark," shouted Victoria. "What is this circus for? I just want all of this to end," was the only thing I managed to say, feeling my voice tremble. Mrs. Alina sprinkled water around the circle, pronouncing words that resembled a chant. Victoria tried to advance further, but seemed like her feet were heavy. She began to sweat, breathing deeply. Gradually, she let out scornful laughs, as if trying to resist the ritual. "Do you really think this theater piece will nullify what I did? I wanted you to suffer, Mark. to understand what it's like to be thrown away. And now I'm trapped in this. Are you happy? My mind was racing. I didn't know if what she was saying made sense, but the mention of "now I'm trapped in this" sounded disturbing. Victoria was pale. Her voice oscillated, sometimes full of resentment, sometimes trembling. At one point, she even seemed to cry. "Enough, Victoria," I murmured. "You took away the one I loved. There's nothing more to do. Just break this." At that moment, Mrs. Alina touched my shoulder and signaled for me not to leave the circle. I remained motionless, despite wanting to approach. The old woman intensified her prayers, and Victoria retreated. It didn't seem like the effect of cinematic magic, but rather a psychological and spiritual confrontation. Suddenly, Victoria dropped the box she was holding, and the objects rolled across the asphalt, pieces of paper, some strands of hair, and torn photos. She tried to back away, but stumbled. The wind extinguished some candles, making everything even more sinister. I looked at Mrs. Alina, not knowing whether to run to help Victoria or to stay still. She met my gaze, shook her head negatively, and continued praying. Victoria then got up, staggering, made a motion to flee to her own car, but panicked upon seeing the scattered objects she would use. In an act of complete desperation, she ran toward the road, apparently to stop a car that was coming at high speed. The driver tried to brake and honk, but there wasn't enough time. The impact was brutal. I was paralyzed by the sound and the sight of her body being thrown. "Stay where you are, Mrs. Alina whispered, almost voiceless. "Don't leave the circle." My pulse was racing out of control. The scene was quick, a flash of horror. The driver of the car stopped further ahead and got out, terrified. Other vehicles began to stop. I almost ran over there, but Mrs. Alina held me back. Her gaze was sorrowful, without any trace of triumph. "Go away, Mark. Don't say anything. Let people call the ambulance. Let the police handle it. This isn't about you anymore." The energy she herself nurtured consumed her. I obeyed, stunned. I got into my car, trembling, and drove away from there. In the passenger seat, Mrs. Alina tried to calm me down, saying she needed to complete the ritual at her house. We didn't exchange another word during the journey. My head was spinning, trying to process what I had witnessed. I didn't wish death upon Victoria, even if I blamed her for Emma's loss. Having seen that scene left me in shock, shaken to the core. As soon as we arrived at her house, I was led to a room where there were images of saints, candles, and herbs hanging. The air was heavy with incense. She asked me to sit on the floor and close my eyes while she performed a final prayer. I felt an enormous weakness, almost as if my body weighed tons. Gradually, a strange serenity invaded me, and tears flowed freely. I cried for Emma, for Victoria, for myself, for everything that had happened so quickly and chaotically. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when Mrs. Alina finished what she was doing, it was almost dawn. "You are free, my son," she said with a tired sigh. "But remember that you must lead an upright life without playing with others' feelings." I returned home unable to sleep. I spent the following days practically holed up in my apartment. I informed work that I would take leave for a while, and my boss understood. The story of Victoria spread quickly through the company. But since no one knew about our deeper connection, I didn't have to provide explanations. I only learned that she died in the hospital hours after being hit, without regaining consciousness. Grief for Emma and the trauma of seeing Victoria die consumed me for many months. I went to therapy, although I didn't share all the details about supposed rituals. I only talked about losing the woman I loved to a sudden illness and seeing a former colleague suffer a fatal accident. The psychologist helped me understand that I couldn't control the actions of others. I began to rebuild my life gradually. I stopped frequenting nightclubs. I set aside that player persona. I donated clothes and objects that reminded me of my nightlife phase. I started valuing my parents and family more. I began having Sunday lunches at their house, trying to reconnect. Some colleagues would invite me out, but I politely declined without revealing that I was afraid something similar might happen again. Even having performed Mrs. Aliner's rituals, a hint of insecurity remained. Gradually, however, this sensation began to dissipate. I returned to work, maintained a more serious professional profile, and over time, I was even promoted for showing dedication and responsibility. When a year had passed since Emma's death, I attended the mass organized by her family to honor their daughter's memory. Emma's parents received me with a sincere embrace. They didn't touch on the subject of Victoria or any supernatural hypothesis. The pain was evident, but I realized that each one was trying to move forward in the best way possible. After the Mass, Mrs. Aliner pulled me aside. "Thank you for coming, Mark. She would be happy to see that you respect her memory." I was speechless. I just nodded in confirmation. There was no mention of the dark past or the rituals. Even so, a silent look between us made me understand that the subject hadn't been forgotten, but rather set aside in the name of the peace we all sought. Time passed, and I became more discreet. I started investing in courses, reading, and did everything to become a better person, honoring Emma's memory. For a long time, I couldn't get involved with another woman. When I felt some attraction, I remembered the suffering I had gone through and preferred not to open my heart. This only changed years later when I met Sarah at a birthday party of a mutual friend. She was nothing like Emma. She had a different way of looking at the world, different opinions. But as had happened before, she made me desire a shared life. I was more mature, and this time I took each step in a cautious and transparent manner. I told Sarah in a summarized way that I had lost someone traumatically and that I had conflicts with a former colleague. I didn't want to give details that would frighten her, but I said that all of this taught me to value people and that I didn't want to play with others' feelings again. She understood, respected my past, and slowly we built a relationship based on dialogue. When, after some time, I asked her to marry me, she accepted, and we held a simple ceremony just for family and close friends. It was a beautiful day, without excesses. My parents and my sister seemed relieved to see me finally treading a path of serenity. As the years passed, we had our first daughter, Claire. One day, I took the little one to meet Emma's parents. Although she wasn't their daughter, I felt that somehow I should maintain the respect I still nurtured for Emma's memory. They received me with smiles, were moved to see that I had moved forward but hadn't forgotten the past. For me, it was a moment of internal reconciliation. I understood that the pain would never be erased, but it became bearable when we honor what was left to us. Mrs. Aliner fell ill some time later and didn't survive. Before she died, she asked to speak with me at the hospital. It was a brief conversation where she held my hand, and despite her weakness, advised me once more to live with truth, so as not to attract the kind of negative energy that once nearly dragged me into the abyss. When she passed away, I cried as if she were my own family, but I also felt gratitude for everything she had done, even if I could never fully understand what had happened that night on the road. To this day, I don't have all the answers. Was there really a hex, or was it all a sequence of coincidences? Had Victoria been involved in obscure practices, or was she just a disturbed woman who found in my inconsistency the trigger for us to mutually feed the pain? What matters is that from that painful period, I extracted a lesson in empathy, humility, and respect. I learned that someone's heart is not ground for games, and that life can take frightening turns without distinction of merit. Today, when I look at my wife and daughter, I feel a sense of peace that I never imagined I would have. Sometimes I still dream of Emma, remembering her smile during our conversations. I wake up melancholic, but then I look at Sarah sleeping beside me and remember that I am alive, and that I can honor the past without being trapped by it. As for Victoria, I stopped nurturing hatred or fear. If there was something beyond what can be seen, I hope her soul has found relief, just as I found mine. And this is my story, perhaps the strangest narrative of my life. I write it not to convince anyone to believe in curses or witchcraft, but to remember that there is real pain, real obsession, and that sometimes the consequences of our actions can surpass the limit of the comprehensible. Despite everything, I still believe we can choose the path of sincerity and care for those who cross our destiny. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted to all future narrations. I post new videos every day here. Hope to see you next time. On the screen now, I'll leave 2 other good videos that I know you'll enjoy. See you there. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Morgan. From a very young age, I noticed that my parents, Diane and Leo, treated me differently than they did my sister Eliza. Although I was born just 2 years before her, I grew up accustomed to receiving praise and affection that seemed like a normal part of my everyday life. Meanwhile, Eliza was often left in the background, like a shadow no one cared to acknowledge. I didn't understand the reason for this disparity, but during childhood, it didn't bother me much. I believed that this way of living was natural, and only understood the magnitude of the injustice many years later. My first indications that something was wrong emerged during birthday celebrations. For my parties, our suburban Connecticut home would be filled with balloons, finger foods, and desserts. Relatives and friends would bring presents, and my parents would beam with pride. For Eliza, when her turn came, there was little fanfare, just a simple cake without decorations, and almost no guests except for a few aunts and uncles. I found it strange, but never really questioned it. Perhaps I was too comfortable in my position as the beloved elder child. Things only got worse as time passed. In school, I participated in theater productions, science fairs, and sporting events, with my mother always sitting in the audience wearing an enormous smile. As for Eliza, when she bothered to show up at all, she kept to herself, detached from everything. Gradually, I noticed she stopped trying to receive approval from anyone. She spent long intervals alone, staring out the window or scribbling in her notebook. Whenever I tried to start a conversation, even out of curiosity, she would scowl and walk away. She seemed not to trust me at all. "Leave your sister alone," my mother would say, shaking her head when I mentioned Eliza's peculiarities. "Some people are born more complicated. You're doing so well, Morgan. Don't worry about it too much." My father, Leo, would usually agree as if the matter wasn't worth discussing. He would pat me on the back and invite me to watch TV or take a walk in the backyard, with a tranquility that irritated me. Sometimes I caught him looking at Eliza from a distance, as if trying to decipher something, but he never spoke openly about it. I wanted to understand what was going on in Eliza's head, but I felt powerless to breach the barrier she had erected against the world. This distance expanded during adolescence. I loved participating in academic competitions, lectures, and essay contests. My parents encouraged me and even paid for extra art and music classes. Meanwhile, Eliza would disappear before school ended or show up with marker drawings all over her arms, like she was sketching symbols nobody understood. At home, she would lock herself in her room and spend hours connected to strange websites or reading books that appeared to be about magic, witchcraft, and similar subjects. Before I knew it, she was dressing in long black clothes, adorned with inverted crosses or necklaces, with pendants I didn't recognize. One day, I invaded her room to borrow a phone charger and nearly fell backward when I opened her dresser drawer. There were various pamphlets, notebooks, and books that talked about witchcraft, sacrifices, and rituals. The drawings sent a chill down my spine. Eliza walked into the room at that exact moment and started yelling at me. "Who gave you permission to snoop around my stuff?" I justified myself, saying I was only looking for a cable. She screamed for me to get out. I hesitated for a moment, realizing this went beyond simple teenage rebellion. There were heavy elements there, things that made me uncomfortable just looking at them. But my parents didn't seem to care. When I told them about it, my mother shrugged. "Eliza has always been contrary. She'll find another hobby soon enough." That troubled me. I wanted to help my sister somehow, but at school, she didn't make it easy either. When I saw her in the hallways, she was always in the company of people nobody knew well. Kids who constantly repeated grades and smoked in secret. It was common for the principal to call my parents to complain that Eliza had missed several classes or gotten into trouble. But they never showed any willingness to help her. I tried to point out that it was wrong to ignore all this, but I only received evasive responses. "I've had enough headaches," my father would say. "If she doesn't want to study, she can deal with the consequences." He said this, but I could see a tension in his gaze, something that seemed to torment him. I never asked directly what it was, but it was clear he also didn't know how to handle Eliza's behavior. Over time, it reached a point where Eliza didn't even try to talk to the family anymore. There was a wall of silence between her and my parents. When I received some academic award, they would celebrate with photos and posts on social media. Eliza would sometimes appear in the living room, look at all that celebration, and leave without saying a word. I could see a deep hurt in her eyes, but I couldn't rescue her from that dark place where she had locked herself away. This continued until we turned 16 and 14, respectively. At my insistence, my parents decided to take a vacation. I thought it might be a chance for reconciliation. We went to a coastal area in Maine in the summer of 2010. We stayed at a simple but pleasant inn. They bought me swimsuits and gave me money to enjoy myself at the boardwalk shops, while Eliza got a hand-me-down one-piece that used to be mine and almost no spending money. When I asked her if she wanted to walk on the sand with me, I received only a look of contempt. "I'd rather stay here," she muttered, sitting by the window of our room. I tried to argue that the beach was beautiful, but she stood up and left, abruptly ending the conversation. That hurt me. The trip I had hoped would serve as a truce only reinforced the gulf between us. Upon our return, she became even more closed off. She spent her nights awake, from what I could hear through the wall separating our rooms. The idea that she might be involved with something sinister began to haunt me. The arguments at home became frequent. My mother and father said they couldn't stand the problems Eliza caused at school anymore. Once she came home with a bruised arm, as if she'd been beaten or gotten into a fight. Nobody asked what had really happened. There were only recriminations. I finally exploded. "Don't you think she needs help? Therapy or something?" My father sighed, annoyed. "We're not going to throw money away on someone who doesn't want to be helped, Morgan. You're doing so well in your studies. Let your sister face the consequences of her actions." He ended the matter in 2 minutes. My mother showed no other attitude, just remained silent. Later she commented, "Sometimes Eliza reminds me of certain things I'd rather forget, but it's too late to change anything." At that moment, I felt a chill. There was something deeper explaining the distance. This wasn't just a difference in temperament between sisters. I started piecing together memories, scattered comments, and concluded there had to be a big secret there. Something no one wanted to tell me. Eliza turned 15 without parties, presents, or even a proper happy birthday. On her birthday, I bought a small cake with my own money and left it in her room. She looked at me and for a second seemed moved, but then turned her face to the wall. "I don't need your pity," she said in a harsh tone. When she got up, I saw in the corner of the bed some notebooks full of strange symbols. She was drawing shapes that reminded me of circles, crossed triangles, and curved figures I didn't understand. I was overcome with a chill. I felt that my sister was sinking into a mysterious and dangerous world. But without support from anyone, what could I do alone? The worst came a few weeks later. Eliza announced she was dropping out of school and leaving home to live with friends who shared practices of witchcraft and energies. Nobody tried to stop her. My father just rolled his eyes. If she wants to ruin her life, let her. Fewer problems for us. My mother limited herself to laconic comments, making it clear she wouldn't make any effort to dissuade her. I was horrified. Are you just going to let her leave without talking, without even trying to understand what's going on. My mother shrugged, and my father went to the backyard to smoke. The day Eliza packed her things, an old backpack and a torn bag, I tried to say goodbye more affectionately. It seemed like the last chance to tell her I really cared. She, however, passed by me without even looking at me, left the house, and disappeared. My parents showed no regret whatsoever. I locked myself in my room and cried. There was something very wrong with this cold attitude. I was certain there was a hidden past that explained so much indifference. I began to investigate, asking my maternal grandparents who lived in a small farmhouse upstate. The first time I brought up the subject, they exchanged worried glances and said they didn't want to speak ill of anyone. I sensed they knew something, but preferred to keep quiet. With my paternal grandparents, Morris and Celeste, it wasn't much different. I visited them one weekend, asking why my parents despised Eliza to the point of letting her leave without protest. My grandfather Morris gave me a stern look and muttered, "Eliza was always different." My grandmother Celeste pretended not to hear, quickly changing the subject. I left there even more determined to seek answers. I also talked to my aunts, uncles, and cousins, but everyone avoided touching on the core of the issue. It was only with an older cousin that I got a relevant clue. She told me that in one of the conversations among the adults, she heard mentions of a terrible man who had marked my mother's life, and that somehow this was linked to Eliza's pregnancy. I was stunned. What if Eliza was the product of violence my mother had suffered in the past? That wouldn't leave my mind. With renewed courage, I confronted my mother in the kitchen when we were alone. "Mom, I know Eliza isn't Dad's daughter. I've heard people commenting on strange things. You need to explain to me what really happened. It's not normal for a family to have such indifference." My mother trembled as she dried the dishes. She denied everything, saying I was making up nonsense. But at the same time, her hands were shaking, and her gaze was distant, as if trying to hold back tears. Shortly after, she asked me to go up to my room, ending the conversation. That only increased my anxiety. I felt I was close to unearthing a serious secret that would explain Eliza's pain. Somehow, I also felt guilty for having received so much attention while my sister was excluded. I wondered if I could have done something to bring her closer to me. One night, I decided I wouldn't rest until I found Eliza to talk to her personally. I managed to contact a classmate of hers, who gave me the address where she was living with other people. It wasn't a very safe neighborhood in New Haven. I took a bus and got off a few blocks from the location. I knocked on an iron door late at night, and a guy who barely looked at me opened the way for me. I entered a room full of candles, worn-out books, and the smell of incense. I recognized Eliza sitting on a torn couch, fiddling with an old cell phone. She raised her eyes and, seeing me, looked surprised but not aggressive. "What do you want?" she asked without beating around the bush. I explained that I had been investigating why our parents treated her in such an unfair way. I also mentioned I suspected there was an old secret, possibly something to do with her origin. At first, Eliza laughed, saying she had no more patience for family matters, but she ended up confessing she had always suspected she wasn't Leo's legitimate daughter. What she didn't understand was why our mother rejected her if she had no fault in any of it. I promised that when I discovered the whole truth, I would tell her. Before leaving, I risked a hug. She didn't exactly return it, but she didn't pull away either. I went home with my heart racing, and shortly after, I finally got the confirmation I had so feared. It was through a conversation with one of my aunts, who took pity on my distress and told me the truth. My mother, when young, had been a victim of abuse by someone close. The result of that violence was Eliza's pregnancy. My father, in love, decided to take on the situation, but never managed to really deal with the trauma. Worse, my mother, whenever she looked at Eliza, remembered that horrible moment, which is why she maintained emotional distance, although she didn't directly blame her. Then something gnawed at me from the inside. Who had been the aggressor? I asked my aunt directly, but she said she couldn't say for sure. I felt there were more sordid details I needed to discover. I confronted my mother again, saying I knew about the abuse. She cried, denied it, begged me not to dig into this past. I felt she was almost giving in until finally, she admitted the perpetrator was someone from my father's own family. I froze, asking if it had been some uncle, cousin, or even a close friend. She looked at me in a way that gave me chills. "It was Morris," she murmured, almost voiceless, "your paternal grandfather." The world seemed to collapse beneath my feet. What? My grandfather Morris. That serious man who used to sit on the porch of the farmhouse and rarely showed emotion. He had attacked my mother and left her pregnant. It seemed impossible, but my mother's devastated look left no doubt. I discovered she never had the courage to report it, that she feared losing my father, feared the reaction of the entire family. There was also the shame that consumed her, that terrible mark that prevented her from loving Eliza as she should. And Dad never knew about this, I asked with a dry throat. He preferred to believe I had been attacked by a stranger, a man who would never be found, my mother replied. I thought it was better that way. I didn't want to ruin everyone's lives, but every time I look at Eliza, I remember that night. It was terrible. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I ran to Eliza's house and told her everything. She was paralyzed, and although her face showed deep pain, she didn't shed tears in front of me. She only said in a firm voice, "Enough running away. I'm going to confront that bastard." I tried to warn her it would be dangerous to confront Grandpa Morris without having a plan. She ignored me, saying she needed to look him in the eyes and ask why he did it, how he could commit such a dirty act. Despite my fear, I went with her. We took a bus to the farmhouse where my grandparents lived. My grandmother Celeste received us with surprise, saying my grandfather was convalescent. Eliza didn't hesitate. "I'll call him myself." We entered the small house and found my grandfather sitting on an old sofa, wrapped in a blanket. He frowned when he saw Eliza. I felt my heart in my mouth. She made no introductions. Why did you ruin my mother's life? Why did you bring me into the world if no one wanted me? He hesitated, stammered something incomprehensible. My grandmother appeared at the door, her face already in panic. Eliza didn't lower her voice. "Grandpa Morris, we know what you did years ago. Do you think you can continue living in peace after everything?" Shock took hold of him. I expected him to make some scandal, but he limited himself to lowering his head. My grandmother began to tremble, not knowing what to do. He opened his mouth as if to say something and stopped. The scene was suffocating. It seemed the air weighed tons. Then Eliza left the room, pushing the door abruptly. I followed her, stunned. As we left, I heard my grandmother begging us to keep quiet for the family's sake. Eliza didn't respond. I didn't have the strength for an argument. We left, leaving a climate of desperation in the house. From that moment, an immeasurable fury took hold of my sister. She told me she was going to seek out a woman known in the area who did blessings, and according to rumors, practiced heavy witchcraft. I was afraid of that path, but I didn't want to abandon her again after all her suffering. She began to frequent this woman's house, called Miss Anna, and invited me to go along. The place was sinister, walls full of symbols, candles of all sizes and colors, bottles hanging from the ceiling. Miss Anna, a lady with very graying hair, didn't seem surprised when Eliza explained what she wanted. "You seek revenge, don't you?" she asked with an enigmatic smile. Eliza nodded. I just tried not to tremble. Miss Anna explained that work of this kind would have its price, that messing with negative energies involves risks. My sister didn't hesitate. "I want him to suffer. It's the least he deserves." I watched without the courage to protest as Miss Anna explained how the rituals would be. We would need something personal from our grandfather, a piece of clothing, a recent photo, and any object that had his trace. I wanted to back away, but Eliza dragged me into that spiral of revenge. Perhaps deep down, I thought it was right for my grandfather to pay for what he did. I remembered our mother, how she lived cowering, crying without being able to vent, and the miserable childhood Eliza had. That's how, one afternoon in the spring of 2011, we stealthily returned to our grandparents' farmhouse. They were on a visit to the doctor, according to rumors we heard from the neighbors. We entered their bedroom, rummaged through the drawers, and took a woolen shirt we knew to be my grandfather's. I also searched a small box of photographs and found an image from a few months earlier in which he appeared sitting in the yard with a serious expression. It gave me chills. We left before any neighbor noticed. In the days that followed, Miss Anna taught us to prepare candles and oils, and to recite strange prayers in a language I didn't understand. The complete ritual would last 2 weeks, each phase consisting of lighting candles, reciting certain words, burning pieces of paper where we wrote Morris's name. Without my parents knowing, Eliza and I would meet almost every night at the house of an acquaintance of hers, an abandoned place where they held mystical gatherings. There we followed the step-by-step given by Miss Anna. Each candle that went out, each syllable we pronounced seemed to fill the air with an indescribable weight. I dreamed of shadows, waking up sweating. Eliza, on the other hand, seemed fueled by a latent anger that kept her steady. After a week, my grandmother Celeste called my mother, distressed, saying my grandfather was having constant nightmares, waking up screaming, with unexplained pains throughout his body. My father was worried, but didn't understand anything. My mother asked him to visit my grandfather, but on the 2 occasions he promised to go, he ended up making excuses not to face his father directly. I suspected my father harbored an old suspicion, but didn't want to admit it. I knew what was happening, but didn't have the courage to tell the truth. We continued the ritual. One night I was so shaken by guilt that I almost gave up on continuing with it. But Eliza held me by the arm and said, "You can pretend none of this exists, but he's the one who brought unhappiness to our home, my existence, Mom's trauma. We can't let this go unpunished." I opened my mouth to retort, but couldn't. The images of my mother suffering and the memory of Eliza's muffled cries during childhood spoke louder. I let her continue. It was like an abyss swallowing everyone. Shortly after, we were summoned to the farmhouse by my grandmother, who begged for help because my grandfather couldn't get out of bed. He had mysterious bruises, fevers that came and went without explanation. When we arrived, we found Morris lying down, sweating, with deep dark circles under his eyes. He looked at us as if seeing ghosts. Eliza approached, cold, and murmured something I couldn't hear completely, but I realized it was some kind of threat or demand. My grandfather tried to stammer some regret, but my sister turned to me and said, "There's no medicine that can cure evil." It was such a tense scene that I had to go out to the yard to catch my breath. I saw my grandmother Celeste on her knees, praying softly, desperate. She begged us to contain our anger, said my grandfather was paying for his sins, that we shouldn't tell my father anything because it would destroy him. Indeed, Dad continued in ignorance, unaware of the abuse. He believed his father had some rare disease. Mom remained silent, equally shaken. I didn't notice in her any desire to stop the course of that suffering. Over the following weeks, my grandfather's health declined rapidly. Doctors couldn't find a diagnosis. My father, after much insistence from my mother, finally started visiting him. He would return home upset, saying none of it made sense. But when the conversation approached revealing something deeper, he would fall silent. Eliza and I avoided asking questions, only exchanging complicit glances loaded with anguish. Despite the revolt and everything he had caused, seeing my grandfather that way also brought me a disturbing sensation. The certainty that we were playing with something dangerous. Yes, there was a part of me that wanted him to pay for his crimes, but at the same time, the fear of crossing all boundaries consumed me. Shortly before completing the 2 weeks of ritual, Eliza warned that would be the last night of spells, the apex of the work. Trembling, I went with her to the isolated place, carrying what remained of the material. Miss Anna waited for us with a grave countenance. We did everything according to the instructions, without any explicit supernatural manifestation, but with our hearts overcome by a suffocating tension. When we finished, I felt as if an enormous weight collapsed on me. Eliza, on the other hand, seemed taken by a somber calm. She wasn't celebrating, but she was firm. The next morning, we received the phone call. My grandfather had died suddenly. My father, desperate, said he had an acute crisis of something no one could define. Even the doctors at the rural hospital couldn't properly explain. The family gathered for the burial. My grandmother, Celeste, cried nonstop, barely able to stay on her feet. My father was incredulous, repeating that Morris had no history of serious illnesses. My mother attended the funeral from a distance, with teary eyes but without expressing anything. Eliza had a pale face and an expression that mixed guilt and relief. I remained by her side in silence. I felt a lump in my throat. I managed to hear my grandmother tell me he paid for what he did. But then my mother pulled her away, trying to console her. My father remained, without discovering what really happened. For him, his father was a victim of some sudden illness. Eliza, my mom, and I kept that secret. Miss Anna never contacted us again to talk about the ritual. And although Eliza continued to have an interest in occult matters, I noticed that after getting her revenge, she set aside the incessant thirst to resort to more sinister practices. Over time, my mother, relieved of the dread of encountering her aggressor at every family gathering, began to have a slightly more affectionate attitude toward Eliza. It wasn't immediate or dramatic. In the first days, she'd still cringe. But eventually, she started inviting her to lunch, asking if she needed anything. It wasn't overwhelming love, but at least it showed regret for years of distancing. I believe she wanted to repair what was possible, albeit late. My sister agreed to come back to live with us, though making it clear she had no expectation of a normal mother-daughter relationship. She resumed her studies, albeit without great enthusiasm, but it was enough to avoid the self-destructive path she was following. As for me, I tried to get closer to her. I made it clear that despite having been the privileged daughter, I never wished her harm. Eliza looked at me with sadness. I know. I just can't forget what happened. I understood then that some scars are too deep to disappear completely. She didn't blame me directly, but she carried a baggage of resentment and loneliness. We, however, began to talk more, to share some experiences. The old rift that existed in childhood gave way to a kind of silent complicity. My grandmother Celeste disappeared for a while, not wanting to talk to me or Eliza. Perhaps she blames us for her husband's death, but she can't prove anything. My maternal grandparents, ignoring the sordid details, pretend to believe the version that my grandfather Morris died from a sudden illness. The extended family prefers to silence everything, as if all that hell had never existed. My father, to this day, doesn't know that Eliza was actually the daughter of his own father. He never suspected deeply, or if he did, he preferred not to see. In the end, I resumed my routine, continued studying, graduated, but with a mark that will accompany me for my entire life. Whenever I remember Morris's face, taken by terror on his deathbed, I wonder if we did the right thing. Could we have resolved it another way? But seeing Eliza finding a minimum of peace and noticing that my mother no longer needs to evade the presence of her aggressor, I feel that part of that shadow has finally dissipated. At the same time, I carry the guilt for having participated, even if indirectly, in an act that borders on darkness. I continue living with this day after day. I learned that in many families, heavy secrets are buried, but they never cease to exist. They remain there, growing like twisted roots underground, until they emerge at some point to shatter everything. I also discovered that sometimes indifference can destroy as much as a brutal act. After all, if our parents had sought help, perhaps Eliza would never have followed the path of hatred. Today, the house breathes a strange serenity. Mom has crying spells, but then goes to cook something for Eliza, trying to make up for lost time. Dad strives to be more present, but continues without knowing the greatest of all secrets. And I, who was always the favorite daughter, now see how much injustice and pain that represented for my sister. I try to give her strength, but I'm not sure if it will be enough. Life goes on, And sometimes I wonder if someday Eliza will return to practicing witchcraft to settle scores. I can't predict the future, but I feel that if there is new suffering, she won't hesitate to act in the shadows again. In the end, all I can do is make sure the truth doesn't repeat itself like a cycle. Knowing my sister was the product of an atrocity committed within our own family makes me question the hypocrisy of blood ties. Perhaps this story will remain forever between the walls of our house, but I've realized there's no pain that disappears completely. I just need to close my eyes to see Eliza's desperate gaze, my mother's agony, the silent cynicism of my grandfather until the end of his days. I will forever carry the memory of each ritual, each candle flame being consumed, each step we took toward a kind of justice that wouldn't be accepted in any law. I think I learned the hard way that there are secrets that devour entire families, and sometimes there's no way to escape. We can hide, sweep under the rug, but the pain returns one way or another. It finds its way, and when that happens, no one comes out unscathed. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive upcoming stories. Your presence is important, and your support is essential. Now let's continue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael, and I grew up in a small village in western Ukraine, surrounded by endless fields of black soil and a few families who knew each other by name. This was in the late 90s, when our country was barely recovering from the collapse of the Soviet Union. My parents, Taras and Oksana, were always very close, although money was scarce. Dad rented small plots of land where he grew various vegetables, mainly potatoes, carrots, and corn, to sell at the Sunday market. Mom stayed at home, cooking on an old wood-burning stove and taking care of us, her many children. There were 7 of us, including me, and Mom was pregnant again with her 8th child. People in the village whispered that having so many mouths to feed wasn't the best idea, especially in those difficult times after the USSR's collapse. But my parents never allowed these conversations to influence their decisions. Dad used to say that each child comes into the world with their own destiny. I was 12 years old and wanted to help somehow, so I took on small jobs from neighbors and gave the earned coins directly to my mother. I always considered myself a cheerful child, with younger brothers and sisters who needed to be protected and guided. We slept on mattresses laid out in a single large room that served as a bedroom. Our house was built of simple brick without finishing, with a slate roof that rattled loudly during heavy rain. At night, when the wind blew, we often heard its whistle through the cracks in the windows. This simplicity was our reality, and despite the difficulties, we found reasons to smile. However, there was one thing that always caused me discomfort: our neighbor Marina, who lived a few houses away from us. She was very reserved, somewhat bitter. Other families told us that many years ago, before moving here, Marina had been in love with my father, but he never showed any interest, and this created a deep resentment against our family. Over time, Marina married a very cruel man who drank and beat her. During one of these terrible arguments, she became infertile, at least according to the rumors spread among the neighbors. Soon after, the husband disappeared, abandoning her. And so she remained alone in that house with peeling paint and a garden overgrown with weeds. Occasionally, my father would comment, "I think Marina has her reasons for being in a bad mood. Life hasn't smiled at her." My mother, on the other hand, preferred not to say anything. The only thing I saw when she crossed paths with Marina on the road was her greeting with a nod or a quiet good day. The response almost always came in the form of a cold, silent gaze, or if we were less fortunate, Marina would release some sarcastic comment like, "Another child, Oksana. Don't you ever get tired of bringing children into the world?" And then she would turn her back, leaving Mom with that sad expression on her face. As Mom's belly grew, the barbs from Marina became more frequent. There was, for example, one Sunday when Mom and I went to the market to see how Dad was doing with sales. That day Marina appeared there, buying tomatoes and greens. As soon as she saw us, she approached Mom and touched her belly without permission, shaking her head in disapproval. "When will you finally learn to stop?" Mom just nodded her head and continued choosing vegetables. I wanted to respond, but I restrained myself. I saw that it truly upset her, and although she tried to stay calm, it was obvious that Marina caused discomfort. In the following weeks, Dad continued to get up at dawn to work in the field. I went to school in the morning, and in the afternoon, I helped a woman named Mrs. Natalia, who had a small grocery store and needed someone to sweep the floor, organize bags of rice, or weigh beans at the counter. It wasn't much, but everything I earned I gave to Mom. One time, Mrs. Natalia started a conversation about Marina while we were stacking bags of flour. "Did you know, Michael, that Marina already tried to have children, but never could? They say she found a way, how should I put it, to dabble with strange things, so she wouldn't see anyone happier than herself." Mrs. Natalia looked at me with a concerned gaze, as if fearing she had gone too far in her comments. I just nodded my head and changed the subject, although this greatly disturbed me. Things began to get truly strange one hot afternoon when I returned from school and found Mom with pale skin, sweating profusely. She said everything was fine, but she didn't look well at all. She asked me to help in the kitchen, so I went to cut vegetables while my younger brothers and sisters played in the yard. The house was small, with a narrow corridor that led to the yard, where we kept several potted plants and an improvised chicken coop. While I was cutting carrots, I heard a scream from the yard. It was my youngest brother Patrick. "Michael, come here, look." I ran there and found him paralyzed before a horrific scene. A dead frog with its mouth sewn shut with a dark thread full of knots, thrown right next to the pots. Besides the closed mouth, the animal had no eyes, and its legs were unnaturally twisted. I felt my stomach turn. My 5-year-old brother wouldn't stop crying. I tried to stay calm, took a piece of cloth, wrapped the frog, and ran to the kitchen, carefully showing it to Mom. She brought her hand to her mouth, horrified, and sat down in a chair, trying to hold back vomit. "Throw it away, Michael, for God's sake. Get rid of it immediately." I did as she asked, crossed the yard, and threw the bundle in a remote place, in a small thicket where nobody usually went. I came back feeling a chill down my spine, because I knew it was a disturbing warning. I had already heard that such things could be related to witchcraft or any kind of macabre ritual. The next day, our neighbor, Mr. Vasil, a very religious man, learned about the incident and shook his head in disapproval. "This is work to bring down the family. I saw something similar in a relative's house, and it led to terrible consequences. I tried to stay strong, but I was constantly plagued by nightmares in which I remembered the frog without eyes, without a mouth, all sewn up. A few days later, we noticed another strange sign. Early in the morning, I found a small cloth bag, tied with a dark rope, on the living room window. I opened it out of curiosity, and a foul smell filled the air. Inside was a pile of dead herbs, pierced with small thorns, with some kind of thick oil dripping. Mom, who could barely walk because of the weight of her belly, began to cough and felt nauseated when she saw it. "For God's sake, son, throw it in the trash," she asked, terrified. I threw it away, and we again felt that knot in our throats when discussing who could be doing this. Marina's name emerged as a suspect. We had no proof, but her behavior, along with rumors that she harbored hatred against us, made her the main suspect. Dad, already tired of hearing so many stories, decided to act. We didn't have money for lawyers or authorities, and it wouldn't make sense to call the police to investigate a suspicious bag. It was then that Dad's friend, Andrew, suggested we seek out grandmother Sophia, an experienced folk healer who also worked as a midwife. He said, if there's anyone who understands these things, works done from envy, it's grandmother Sophia. She helps women with difficult births, but she also knows how to ward off the evil eye. We had no other choice, so Dad and Mom agreed that as soon as the pregnancy became more advanced, we would use the healer's services. Mom, increasingly depressed, spent sleepless nights, saying she felt a presence around the house. She spoke in whispers, afraid of waking the younger brothers and sisters, but I heard her clearly. "Michael, I feel as if someone is spying on me through the window. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps in the yard." I calmed her as best I could, but inside I was scared myself. I tried to convince myself that it was just a product of her imagination, overloaded by the tension of pregnancy and recent shocks. When there was about a month left until delivery, we finally decided to seek out grandmother Sophia. We went one stuffy morning, soon after sunrise. Her house stood on a bumpy dirt path behind a small cornfield. The facade was simple, but in the yard there were many herbs hanging to dry, and piles of glass bottles with colored liquids. Grandmother Sophia was an elderly woman of uncertain age, with gray hair tied in a bun, and a firm gaze. She quickly examined my mother and said, "Your baby will be born soon. You are weak, but there is still time to regain some strength. I'll give you herbal teas that will help strengthen you." Dad took the opportunity to ask if she knew any way to ward off evil intentions. She looked at us as if she knew much more than she was saying. "I will perform a spiritual cleansing, but beyond that, call me at the time of delivery. Something very heavy is circling your house." We left there with a thread of hope. Mom held the envelope of herbs that grandmother Sophia had given her, and Dad tried to show confidence. However, nothing eased the feeling that a tragedy was imminent. A few days later, in the early hours, my mother's screams of pain startled me awake. I ran to my parents' bedroom and found her twisted in pain, sweating profusely. Dad looked at me anxiously. "Go get grandmother Sophia now." I didn't even dress properly, ran out crossing the dirt road. Fear consumed me, especially when passing in front of Marina's house, which was immersed in darkness. With each step, I felt my heart pulsing in alert, as if at any moment she might emerge from some corner to stare at me with those cold eyes. Fortunately, I arrived unharmed at the healer's house, who was already waiting for me at the door, as if she had sensed what was happening. She took her bag and followed me without saying much. When we returned, we found Mom moaning with labored breathing. Grandmother Sophia examined her and made a worried expression. "This child wants to be born now, but it's too early." Dad ran to heat water and prepare clean cloths. Grandmother Sophia scattered incense around the room, softly reciting prayers. My younger brothers and sisters, frightened, tried to peek through the crack in the door. Mom started screaming in pain, and the healer asked all of us to leave to give space. I stayed in the living room, hugging Petrick and the others, not knowing exactly how to comfort them. The rain came suddenly, hitting hard on the roof, and the wind seemed like it would tear off the slate at any moment. It blew so strongly that the living room door slammed forcefully, making the brick walls tremble. The storm mixed with Mom's screams and Grandmother Sophia's prayers. "Strength, Oksana, strength." I heard the firm voice of the healer. I remained motionless, trembling, hoping everything would go well. The air was suffocating, as if a dark shadow hung over us. At some point, the screams stopped. There was absolute silence, except for the noise of the rain and wind. I gathered courage and slowly opened the bedroom door. The scene I saw marked me forever. Mom was lying with a pale face, marked by pain. Dad was holding her hand, his face full of despair. Grandmother Sophia was holding a small bundle in her arms. It was the baby who had been born, but it made no sound at all. I approached, and the healer looked at me with a silent warning, as if she didn't want me to see. However, I couldn't avoid it. The cloth that wrapped the newborn slipped a little, revealing parts of its small body. It was all twisted, as if lacking bones, and the little face didn't have the normal features of a baby. The eyes were closed by stuck skin, and the mouth seemed sealed. There was also a strange smell, half sweet, but at the same time rotten. I immediately stepped back, feeling nausea and a terror I had never experienced before. Mom, realizing what had happened, began to sob. Dad pushed me away so I wouldn't see any more. But that fraction of a second had already been enough for me to understand that something very serious had occurred. The baby hadn't survived. Grandmother Sophia, with a heavy voice, turned to Dad. "This is a special kind of work, very powerful. Someone here doesn't want to see this family grow." Mom fainted from exhaustion. Dad covered his mouth, suppressing a scream of anger and pain. We didn't know what to do, where to turn. I, just a boy, felt my world crumbling there, in the middle of that small house. The storm continued to rage, and lightning illuminated the sky, as if nature shared our despair. Later that same night, Grandmother Sophia took charge of cleaning the room and lighting candles. She said it wouldn't be good to attract neighbors' attention or raise rumors for now. Dad even considered notifying the authorities for registration, but the costs and bureaucracy seemed impossible to him at that time, and there was fear of spreading more malicious rumors. In the urgency and shock, he decided to quietly bury the baby in a deserted piece of land, an act which, though sad, seemed the only alternative. I remember sitting on the doorstep, listening to the rain gradually subsiding, quietly crying for that brother I would never get to know. In the following days, Mom isolated herself, refusing to talk about what had happened. Her physical health improved a bit, but emotionally she remained broken. From time to time, she would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming that she heard a baby crying, running down the hallway, calling for the little one who would never come. Dad tried to console her, but he himself had become a bitter and silent man. When he went out to the field, I often heard him take the bottle of vodka he kept behind the stove. The bitter sip seemed to keep him on his feet for a few more hours of work. The news of what happened, though not completely, spread. The comments were that the 8th child had been born prematurely and died. But some knew the story of witchcraft that circled around our house, and Marina was considered responsible. Each time we crossed paths with her, we felt an almost palpable tension. And the strangest thing was that Marina began to behave differently. Sometimes she even tried to smile, though it was an empty smile that made us even more suspicious. Grandmother Sophia visited us several times, praying and blessing Mom with branches of rue and rosemary. She explained that the evil that had been sent could return to the one who sent it, especially if the affected family turned to practices of spiritual cleansing. I didn't fully understand how this worked, but the way she spoke made it clear that the person who had done so much evil could pay a high price. Soon another piece of news spread through the village. Marina, supposedly infertile, was pregnant. It was a shock to everyone, and I couldn't help but think about the possible reversal that Grandmother Sophia had talked about. Some villagers said that perhaps she had never been truly infertile, just had difficulty conceiving in the past. Others claimed that something supernatural was involved. In any case, people were frightened, wondering how Marina, who said she couldn't have children, now displayed a growing belly. At the same time, rumors circulated that the man who lived with her had left, abandoning her as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. The story seemed to be tragically repeating itself. Meanwhile, Mom tried to restore a minimal routine, cooking beans and rice each day, washing clothes in the improvised tub in the yard. I helped her whenever I could, but I saw in her eyes a constant sadness. Dad, for his part, returned to the field before sunrise and came home in the evening exhausted, barely exchanging words. In some corner of his heart, there was a flame of anger that he directed at Marina, but also a feeling of guilt, because he thought he could have done something to protect Mom and the baby. The months dragged on. Marina rarely appeared on the street, as if she was ashamed or afraid of judgments. There were days when I saw her from the window, holding her already quite large belly, and she would glance at me in passing. Her face had become even paler, her hair disheveled. She looked very different from the woman who once cast defiant, angry glances at us. It was hard to tell whether she regretted what she had done or harbored even more rancor. Until one stifling morning, we woke up to commotion in the street. Several neighbors had gathered in front of Marina's house, whose doors were closed and windows blocked. An elderly woman said she smelled a rotten odor coming from inside. The bravest men forced the lock open. Dad and I came closer, curious, and at the same time horrified by what we might discover. The smell was so unbearable that many plugged their noses or retreated in disgust. It was then that they found Marina inside on the kitchen floor, dead for several days, judging by the state of decomposition. It seemed she had suddenly fallen, hitting her head on some corner. There was no one to help her, and she simply remained there sprawled, while the body decomposed under the stifling heat. We also learned that the child in her womb had not survived, a tragedy of incredible magnitude. Many of those who entered the house felt sick, and the news spread quickly. Some said it was divine justice. Others, more pious, prayed for her soul. I couldn't help but remember Grandmother Sophia's words. Evil, when directed against the innocent, returns to the sender with relentless force. Marina's funeral was quick and quiet. Almost no one came, except for a few curious people and the authorities responsible for registering the death. No one openly spoke about the possibility of witchcraft, but it was a thought that hung in the air. A few months later, a family from far away appeared, who obviously didn't know this whole story, to buy the house. Mom didn't make any large comment regarding Marina, but I noticed that for a few days, she again had nightmares. Dad, for his part, made it clear that the subject was closed. Nevertheless, we all carry within us the scars of that story, and especially the consequences of the rancor that surrounded us for so long. With Marina's death, life in the village slowly began to return to what it was before. But in our house, there remained an almost palpable silence. Grandmother Sophia continued to visit us, bringing tea to strengthen my mother and encouraging the family to move forward. She repeated, "We need to close this cycle. Let's light candles, pray, put an amulet on the door. Whatever Marina did no longer has power here." Dad accepted the suggestion, and on a quiet night, we spread holy water in the corners of the yard and positioned a small wreath of branches at the entrance. Mom cried discreetly during the ritual, remembering our baby who was gone. Even so, I could feel a certain relief in her eyes, as if we were finally saying goodbye to all that horror. The months passed, and our life went on. I returned to studying and helping at Mrs. Natalia's little store. My brothers and sisters gradually returned to playing, albeit with some caution not to venture into more remote areas of the yard. Dad dedicated himself to planting, and Mom regained her affectionate way with everyone, although she never returned to being exactly the same. Sometimes I would find her sitting on the small bench in the yard, looking at the sky pensively. Then I would approach, try to talk, but she would limit herself to holding my hand, thanking me for the company. Once I asked her if she still heard baby cries in the quiet of the night. She just shook her head no, with tears forming in the corners of her eyes. I preferred not to insist, but I understood that she kept within herself a deep wound that might never completely heal. But at least the pain had calmed down. When I remember it all, it seems like a distant nightmare. The mutilated frog, the cloth bag, the terrifying birth, Marina's death. However, I still carry in my memory the certainty that envy and rancor can lead people to terrible acts, and that evil, in one way or another, finds its way back to who spreads it. It's not a lesson I enjoy learning, but it's something that makes me value the unity of my family. In the midst of scarcity, we had each other, and it was this union that saved us from plunging even deeper into a spiral of hatred. Sometimes when I go out to help my father in the cornfield, I stop, look at the horizon, and think about those dark days we lived through. Nobody mentions Marina anymore, as if it were an old story that doesn't deserve remembrance. But I don't forget the marks left by that spell and by blind rage. They still live in my memory, a silent warning that certain boundaries of evil should not be crossed, and especially that one should not underestimate the power of a heart consumed by envy. I never thought my simple days guided by effort and honesty would take such an uncertain turn, filled with unease. I always believed that bills were paid with hard work, and there were no shortcuts worth taking. With limited education and few opportunities, I spent my life jumping from job to job, trying to maintain my dignity while bills and unexpected expenses multiplied. When reality became unbearable and the lack of prospects backed me into a corner, I met someone who promised to change everything. Looking back now, I realize my worst mistake was accepting that invitation. My name is Alex. Since childhood, I'd heard that only those with connections, or those willing to risk everything beyond their limits, can get ahead. I never agreed with this thinking, but when necessity speaks louder than reason, we tend to lower our guard. It was during this moment of desperation that I received a visit from an acquaintance named Marcus. He invited me to attend a private gathering in an upscale neighborhood in Boston. He explained little, only saying that influential people would be present, and if I was shrewd, I might leave with a proposal that could help me make a financial leap forward. I didn't ask many details because hunger and the stack of unpaid bills on my table screamed louder than common sense. On the appointed night, a cold Tuesday in late November, I dressed in the most presentable clothes I owned. A second-hand suit I'd bought on clearance. It still gave me the feeling of being someone minimally respectable. I took the subway, then walked through well-lit streets until I reached an old but impeccably maintained building. From the sidewalk, I could see it was a luxurious place with an imposing facade and an entrance hall filled with modern art installations. Even without knowing exactly where this would lead, I entered with my heart pounding. Approaching the reception desk, I showed the invitation Marcus had secured for me. I was directed to a salon at the end of a spacious corridor, where the aroma of expensive cologne mingled with soft jazz. I felt out of place, like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. Many people circulated around, all well-dressed and conversing with a confidence I could never possess. While looking for a corner to stay in without drawing attention, a deep voice interrupted me. "You must be Alexander. I heard you were looking for a better opportunity in life." I turned and found myself facing a middle-aged woman wearing an impeccable charcoal suit. She had a serious expression and a confident posture. I immediately realized she wasn't just anyone. I composed myself to try to respond appropriately. "Yes, I am. They told me this might be a place of opportunities." "You must be." She offered her hand with a slight smile. "My name is Victoria, but don't stand on formality. Let's talk a bit." Without much choice, Victoria led me to a more private table where she pulled out a chair for me before sitting down. The music in the background and the noise of conversations became almost imperceptible as she spoke. "They said you have talent, but never had the right chance. Is that true? Well, I've just been working as I can. It's difficult to stand out when you don't have education and don't know the right people." She nodded, looking fixedly into my eyes. "And how far would you be willing to go to change that reality?" I felt a chill run down my spine. The question seemed simple, but carried an enormous weight. Still, I answered sincerely, I would do whatever it takes, as long as it's honest. Victoria maintained her smile, but something in her gaze became more opaque. Honesty is a relative concept, Alexander. There are shorter, less bureaucratic paths to get what you want, but they require courage, sacrifices that most people aren't willing to make. Before I could fully understand, she handed me a card. There was only a name and an address. I couldn't disguise my bewilderment. And where will this lead me? She stood up, adjusted her blazer, and simply said, if you really want to change your life, go to this place tonight at midnight. Don't be late. She left, leaving me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The room's clock marked just after 11 when I decided to leave. That meeting hadn't brought me anything concrete, just an enigmatic address and a feeling that I was getting into something much bigger than I could comprehend. I walked to a rideshare pickup point and headed to the indicated location. We passed through increasingly deserted streets, and at a certain point, the driver asked if I was sure about the destination. I just nodded, even though I wasn't sure of anything. We arrived at a dark road that left the urban limits and advanced through a region with few houses and empty lots. Finally, I spotted an iron gate. Paying the driver with the last bills I had left, I got out of the car and observed the area around me. Tall hedges, a poorly lit dirt path, and in the background, an old mansion that appeared well-maintained despite its somber air. The gate opened with a creak, inviting me to enter. With careful steps, I followed to the main door, which was ajar. I pushed it cautiously. An extensive corridor was revealed, illuminated by yellowish lamps. Soon I saw Victoria standing at the end, waiting for me. She raised her arm to greet me. I'm glad you came. I entered without knowing exactly what to say. There were few people in the mansion, and all seemed involved in discreet conversations. Victoria led me to an adjoining room that, by its decoration, resembled an adapted ballroom. Inside, I noticed a table covered with a dark fabric, and on it were some strange objects. They looked like ancient books, yellowed notebooks, and what appeared to be a metal cylinder. What is all this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Victoria approached. This is where you will formalize your desire to prosper. This place usually receives people who, like you, want to leave behind a life of failures. Formalize how? She touched the thickest book with a gray cover. With a signature. For a moment I hesitated. My common sense screamed that there was something very strange about that proposal. But the memory of my empty bank account and the pile of debts tightened my chest. Victoria noticed my doubt and added, You're here because you want real changes, right? There isn't always time to evaluate everything in detail. Think about what's worse, continuing as you are or risking a new path. I laughed nervously, imagining it was some kind of partnership document or something similar. Then she handed me a fountain pen with ink so dark it was almost purple. Read before signing, she said, without averting her gaze. I opened the book and saw texts written in archaic language. I didn't understand some of the words, as if they were from an ancient dialect. My name, however, was clearly printed on the page Victoria indicated to me. Fear began to take hold, but at the same time, hunger, bills, and the certain future weighed even more heavily. I hesitated for a few seconds, inwardly questioning whether I should really do this. Finally, I signed with a trembling hand, not knowing exactly what I was doing. The silence that followed was disturbing. I felt a slight buzzing in my ears, like a vacuum that swallows the sound of the environment. Victoria closed the book carefully and congratulated me. "Now you are part of something greater. I'll have them contact you. For today, you can go rest." I didn't have the courage to ask anything else. The sensation of something out of the ordinary accompanied me as I left the mansion. I took the bus back downtown, trying to rationalize what had just happened. I fell asleep late that night, my thoughts divided between the hope for a better future and the fear of what I had just signed. The strange thing is that the next morning brought the first sign of an unexpected benefit. An old contact of mine from a tech company called, offering a temporary job with a payment that would help clear urgent debts. It wasn't much, but it gave me relief I hadn't seen in a long time. Later that day, I received more calls from companies where I had left resumes months ago with no success until then. Suddenly, everything seemed to be flowing. Although still suspicious, I concluded that this pact might really be opening doors. I had no idea that this apparent help would come with a much higher price. It was only after lunch that I noticed the first strange sign. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I noticed a subtle delay in my reflection. I blinked quickly to test, and the image took a moment to blink back. I convinced myself it was an illusion caused by fatigue. That afternoon, I went downtown to resolve some pending issues, and while walking through the streets, I noticed that people seemed to observe me differently. Perhaps it was just paranoia, but that feeling of being watched accompanied me all afternoon. At dusk, while waiting for the subway at a station, I felt my phone vibrate. It was a message from an unknown number. "Alexander, don't try to evade the conditions. Your signature cannot be reversed." I was paralyzed, staring at the screen. I even replied asking who it was, but there was no response. I thought it prudent to delete the message, but of course, I didn't forget what was written. My ordeal began there. Gradually, the anomalies accumulated. My reflection continued to exhibit behaviors subtly out of sync. On quick occasions, I thought I saw my face in the windows smile in a way that I hadn't. One night, the television in the living room froze, displaying for a few moments a snippet of an old newspaper, as if time had jumped backward. Not everyone would notice something so subtle, but I was on edge and noticed every detail. Still, I continued living my life. I needed to pretend normalcy at work. My colleagues noticed I was quieter, but no one dared to ask much. Only one friend, Sarah, noticed my restlessness and called me aside. "Is everything okay, Alex? You've been acting strange. You don't even seem to pay attention to conversations." Did something happen? I tried to disguise it. "Just some financial problems. You know how it is." She studied me for a few seconds, as if she didn't completely believe me, but didn't insist. If I had told her, I would have been called crazy, and deep down, I was already doubting what I was seeing. A little more than a week later, I received a call from Victoria. The number was unknown, but that voice was unmistakable. "Alexander, how have you been feeling these last few days?" I hesitated. "I feel confused. I don't think I can understand what's happening to me. It's normal. When we accept certain conditions, we go through adjustments." But don't worry, everything will become clearer soon. You'll receive signs of what you gained by signing the agreement." "What agreement is this, after all?" I asked without hiding my desperation. "You'll know when you're ready," she ended the call. That only served to worsen my state of anguish. The next day, upon waking, I went to the bedroom mirror and saw my image staring at me with very wide-open eyes before I even approached. The shock made me take a step back. I blinked several times until the reflection seemed to align with my movements. I didn't know if I had gone crazy or if there was really something there, a lapse in synchrony that wasn't natural. As the days passed, the feeling that something was following me became undeniable. In moments of distraction, I thought I saw a silhouette in the elevator mirror of my building. But when I looked directly, it disappeared. The nights became dense and the silence frightening. There came a point when I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel as if my heart would stop. On 2 occasions, I tried to call Marcus, the acquaintance who had taken me to that event, but he never returned my calls. In an attempt to find some way out, I decided to visit an elderly man who lived in the same neighborhood as me. Mr. Chen was known for his knowledge of Eastern spirituality and protective charms. Even without fully believing in these things, I needed to cling to some hope. I told him I had been experiencing a terrible sensation, that I couldn't sleep, and that I had the impression of not being alone anymore when I looked in the mirror. He looked at me with a certain pity, and without hesitating handed me a small jade amulet. "Try to keep this close to your body. I won't ask for details, but I sense that you've gotten involved with something heavy. If you want advice, Alexander, it's not enough just to carry an amulet. There's a price to be paid for certain choices." I appreciated his kindness, but I left there without relief. The words, "there's a price to be paid," kept echoing in my head. One of the strangest episodes happened on a Wednesday morning. I usually left early to catch the train and arrive at work on time. But when passing through the station's entrance, I looked at my reflection in the protective glass and almost shouted. My image was standing still, with its mouth slightly open, while I continued moving. For a second, I remained motionless, waiting for the reflection to imitate me. When this happened, it took long enough for my heart to race. That day, I missed work. I didn't have the psychological condition to pretend normalcy. Wandering the streets, I sat on a park bench trying to understand what was happening to me. I recapitulated in my mind the entire sequence of events. My financial difficulty, the mysterious meeting, the signing of a book I barely understood. I remembered Victoria's vague promises and realized I had received nothing beyond small glimpses of luck, much less than the price I was paying. Where were the promises of a better life? On the contrary, everything around me seemed to be falling apart. I decided I needed to face the situation head-on. I took the card Victoria had given me, the same one that showed the mansion's address, and resolved to return there. It was already night when I mustered the courage. I passed through dark alleys until I found the same iron gate. This time I knocked several times, but no one answered. I pushed the gate, which, like before, was merely leaning closed. I advanced to the main door and rang the metal knocker. Nothing. The silence was frightening. I entered the mansion, which apparently was empty. The corridors were dark, Only a few wall lamps projected elongated shadows. The room where I signed, the book seemed to have been dismantled. I saw no sign of Victoria, no table, no objects. A desolate emptiness took over every corner. Suddenly, I felt a chill and heard a snap coming from the back of the corridor. I went to check, but what I found was a locked door. Through the windows, I noticed that some parts of the salon were covered by cloths and boxes, as if someone had vacated the place in a hurry. I was about to leave when I noticed some loose sheets on the floor. I picked one up and saw that it had inscriptions that referred to those in the book where I signed my name. Enigmatic words I couldn't decipher. I folded the sheet and put it in my pocket. On the way back, I passed through the empty room again and thought I saw a silhouette standing next to one of the columns. I ran there, but there was no one. I couldn't say whether that was the fruit of my fear or if there really was someone watching me. I returned home so shaken that I couldn't think of anything else. I decided to take a cold shower and try to sleep. But upon entering the bathroom, the light began to flicker insistently. I felt the room temperature suddenly drop, and the mirror, already fogged by the vapor, revealed for an instant a dark figure behind me. I turned around with a start, but only found the bare wall. My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. In the following weeks, the atmosphere was one of total restlessness. People around me noticed that I was paler, with deep circles under my eyes. I barely slept. I constantly dreamed of the night of the pact, with the dark ink on my hands and the sensation of having delivered something I could never recover. I tried calling Victoria several times, but the number always went to a voicemail that didn't identify the owner. Then an even more sinister event unnerved me. One afternoon, when I returned from work, I noticed that the door to my apartment was slightly open. I entered cautiously, seeing no signs of a break-in. Apparently nothing had been stolen, but on the living room table there was a note. "Alexander, the change has begun. The reflections only announce what is to come." There was no signature, but I knew who would send such a note. It took my breath away. What did they mean by what is to come? Was I destined to transform into another person? Or worse, to completely lose my sense of reality? Desperate, I arranged a meeting with Sarah, my longtime friend, and decided to tell part of what I was experiencing. We sat in a coffee shop, and already unable to hide so much, I poured out my feelings. "Look, I don't know how to explain it to you. I signed something, only it wasn't a common contract, and since then I see strange things in the mirror. My reflection acts as if it were another person." She looked at me in disbelief. "Alex, are you okay? Have you been drinking?" "No, nothing like that," I said, breathing heavily, my voice faltering. "I think I need help, but I don't know who to turn to." Sarah tried to be rational. "Maybe it's just stress, some hallucination due to anxiety. We can look for a professional." "You don't understand," I interrupted. "It's something different from anything I've ever experienced." She squeezed my shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Stay calm. You're not alone." I appreciated the support, but I knew that neither Sarah nor anyone else would be able to comprehend the depth of what was happening. In the following days, I tried to follow her advice and sought a psychologist. But each time I tried to describe my symptoms, I ended up feeling more confused and overcome by the fear of being diagnosed as someone having a breakdown. It wasn't delirium. That was very real. The supernatural events intensified in a subtle but constant way. The lights at home flickered at night. The doors creaked without wind. And especially, I increasingly noticed the discrepancy of my reflection, which sometimes stared at me defiantly. One terrible dawn, I got up to drink water and almost dropped the glass when I saw that my image in the corridor mirror hadn't left the bedroom yet. It was as if it had stayed behind, watching me as I walked. I let out a moan of dread and ran to the bedroom, locking the door. Shortly after, I had a feeling that I needed to directly confront the one who had offered me the pact. I decided to return to the mansion one more time. I don't know if it was madness or desperation, but I took the risk. Arriving there, I found everything closed, seeming abandoned. The garden was overgrown with tall weeds, and there was no indication that anyone frequented the place. With a push, I opened the main door, but this time the interior was almost empty. I stepped on old boards, hearing each creak echo on the bare walls. No light, no furniture, absolutely nothing. While examining the place, I felt a cold breath on my face. I turned, and there was Victoria, standing in the corner of the corridor, staring at me with that indecipherable expression. "It was about time you returned," she said with a calm voice that deeply irritated me. "What have you done to me?" My voice came out trembling. "I didn't do anything. You agreed to participate. You knew deep down that you were giving something of yours to receive something in return." Anger made me ignore fear. "I didn't receive anything. I'm living in hell." She opened a wizened smile. "You don't understand the gift you've been given. Your life now belongs to something greater. This restlessness, this different reflection, are part of the transition, and it's not possible to go back." I felt an insane desire to scream, but I contained the voice stuck in my throat. Victoria approached slowly. "Living in a common way no longer makes sense for you. That's why your body reacts. Your soul demands the price of what was negotiated." "I don't want this anymore," I stammered. "There is no more wanting. The pact sealed your destiny." She then turned her back, walking to a side room where she dissipated like a shadow that blends with the darkness. I shined my cell phone flashlight in that direction, but found no one. Despair took hold of me. All I wanted was to wake up from this nightmare. I returned home. From then on, the facts become even more inexplicable. My body began to play tricks on me. One morning, I opened my eyes and found myself standing in the living room, staring at my reflection in the turned-off television. I didn't remember having left the bed. It was as if part of me acted on its own. I began to have frequent memory lapses, and that terrified me as much as the apparitions in the mirror. People around me distanced themselves, noting that my behavior wasn't normal. No one said anything directly, but I saw in their looks a mixture of pity and fear. Even at work, rumors began to arise that I might be using some substance or going through psychiatric problems. My boss called me to talk, but I couldn't formulate a convincing excuse. I asked for a few days off and locked myself at home. The worst moment came when, on a night of total insomnia, I came face to face with the bedroom mirror. The reflection was motionless, with its back to me, as if it were another body present in the room. I took a deep breath, gathering what little courage I had left, and took a few steps forward. As soon as I approached, that silhouette turned, showing a face that, although it was mine, had empty eyes and a distorted smile. The lamp flickered, and I smelled something strange, like mold and damp earth. "Alexander," said a voice in my head that I knew wasn't mine, "it's time to recognize that you no longer belong to yourself." I wanted to scream, but a blockage prevented me from emitting any sound. I felt my legs fail, and I fell to my knees. The reflection advanced toward me, and for a second I thought it would cross through the glass and take my place. I closed my eyes, expecting an impact that didn't come. When I opened them, the mirror only returned the image of my empty room, but the certainty that there was something there, a presence that would accompany me forever, took root in me. Today, I try to live my life without completely falling apart, but I know that everything has changed irreversibly. The simple act of looking in the mirror has become a test of courage, because I never know what I will find. On certain days, I avoid reflections, cover the mirrors, or turn off the bathroom lights before entering. I've lost count of how many times I've tried to pray, to beg that it was a dream from which I could awaken. However, everything indicates there is no escape. From time to time, I receive enigmatic messages on my phone, as if they were from Victoria, though they never clearly identify themselves. They remind me of the chance I supposedly gained, although I see no benefit in it. Perhaps at some incomprehensible level, this form of life beyond the common means some advantage that I still can't see. But deep down, I feel I've lost my identity, and what remains is just the shadow of who I once was. Relating all this here is my last attempt to expose the truth about what I've experienced. If someday I disappear or seem to radically change personality, let it be recorded. The pact I signed wasn't just a financial contract or something similar. It was a surrender of my being to a force I don't understand. And although many people say easy paths don't exist, I learned in the worst way that when they appear, the price to be paid can be your very soul. If I've gotten this far, it's because I'm still fighting, but I don't know how long I'll be able to resist. My image in reflections seems to gain more freedom, while I feel I'm losing control of my actions. Perhaps soon I'll be nothing more than a puppet of something darker that watches me from the other side of the mirror. For now, I continue writing, recording every detail, and if this account reaches other people, I hope it serves as a warning. There is no miracle that doesn't demand its price, nor shortcut that doesn't require its tribute. Every time I think about freeing myself, I remember the night when, on impulse and desperation, I believed the promises of an elegant woman without understanding that I was dealing with something beyond human comprehension. This is the destiny I chose, or that was imposed on me from the moment I dipped my pen in the dark ink and signed my name in that book. And now the reflection that stares at me in the mirror no longer belongs to me, and my voice echoes like a lament in the hope that someone, somewhere, hears it and learns not to repeat my mistakes. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every day here. Hope to see you in the next ones. On the screen now, I'll leave 2 other good videos that I know you'll enjoy. See you there. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in a quiet suburb of Portland, where life moved at a gentle pace. From an early age, I was deeply attached to my family, especially my mother, Eleanor. She taught me important values like loyalty and respect for others. In my teenage years, I often daydreamed about having my own home someday, a relationship that would make me feel secure. I always loved the feeling of having a place to call my own. In the fall of 2009, I met Jason, who worked in IT at a small local startup. We first saw each other at a backyard gathering organized by a mutual friend, Michael. I remember there were more than 20 people there that evening, all laughing, drinking craft beers, and discussing politics and indie bands. But I couldn't stop noticing Jason. He wasn't particularly extroverted, but he had this genuine, calming smile. I didn't feel that overwhelming passion you see in movies, but rather a sense of comfort, like recognizing something familiar in him. At the end of the party, while everyone was saying their goodbyes, we stayed outside talking. It was simple conversation. He asked about my work, my interests, whether I preferred going out or staying in. Within minutes, I noticed he was truly listening to what I said, not just nodding along, but remembering details and asking specific questions. That surprised me. When I went home that night, my heart was racing, but not from wild passion. It was a feeling of peace, like I could trust him. In the days that followed, Jason asked me out, and we naturally grew closer. We started dating in late 2009, and by the summer of 2010, we were married in a simple ceremony at a small chapel my mother had attended for decades. My family and a few close friends attended. There was no pomp or luxury, just plenty of love and warmth. Afterward, we had a modest reception with soft music and homemade food. In the beginning of our marriage, we lived in that eternal honeymoon phase. We'd wake up early, have coffee together, and make plans for the future. Jason was affectionate and very supportive. If I was tired, he'd help with household chores. If I needed to vent about work problems, he'd listen without interrupting. I truly felt I had found not just a husband, but a friend. Our days flowed harmoniously, even when we had minor disagreements, normal couple stuff. Sometimes he'd leave wet towels on the bed. I'd complain, he'd apologize, and we'd move on. The years passed, and at some point, routine began to wear on us. Still, nothing unusual. We had occasional arguments, but always reconciled quickly. Until around the beginning of 2015, when I noticed subtle changes in Jason's behavior. Before, he loved talking about my day and my personal projects, but he began to seem distracted, responding with single words. If I asked him something, it would take him time to pay attention, as if he were living in a separate world. At first, I thought it was just stress from work. His company was demanding increasingly higher targets, and he'd come home exhausted. I tried to be more understanding. I'd prepare special dinners and avoid complaining. But over time, his behavior worsened. Sometimes I'd try to discuss something important, like a bill we needed to pay or family news, and he seemed not to hear. He spent a lot of time on his phone, checking messages I didn't dare ask about. I started to feel invisible. If I cried, he didn't notice. If I showed sadness, he'd look at me with a blank expression and change the subject. There were nights when I felt an immense coldness, lying beside him. I'd try to get close, but he'd turn away or say he had a headache. It hurt deeply. I began questioning if the problem was me, if I had failed as a wife. Once I spent the entire day at a salon, did my nails, got my hair done. That evening, I suggested we go to a cozy little tavern downtown, a place we used to frequent when we first started dating. During dinner, he barely looked up at me. There wasn't a single compliment, not even a comment about my new haircut. I held back tears as long as I could. When I got home and faced myself in the mirror with smudged makeup and a dejected face, I wondered if there was any love left between us. My mother noticed I was down, though I didn't want to worry her. She was always good at reading my feelings. Knowing I avoided the subject, she simply said, "Honey, I can see you're not happy. If you need to talk, I'm here, no judgment." I'd nod, pretending everything was fine, but I was a terrible liar. Around this time, I heard about people turning to energy healers or spiritual cleansings to solve marital problems. I'm not one to blindly believe in any kind of mysticism, but I don't dismiss the possibility that there's more to the world than what we see. I remembered my mother occasionally mentioning a woman named Ruth, a spiritual worker known for helping couples in crisis. On impulse, I picked up the phone and called her. A serene voice answered, "You took your time. I've been waiting for you." I immediately felt a lump in my throat, not understanding how this woman could know I would call. I arranged to visit her the following afternoon, without telling Jason. That morning he rushed out of the house, barely saying goodbye. It seemed he didn't even notice if I was okay or not. I ordered a rideshare and headed to an older neighborhood where cobblestone streets and colorful craftsman houses reminded me of a bygone era. When I arrived, I knocked on a worn wooden door with antique hardware. After a few seconds, the door opened, and I saw a short woman with gray hair tied in a patterned scarf. She looked into my eyes as if she already knew my entire story. "Come in, child. I've been expecting you," she said, leading me to a simple room with an altar decorated with candles, flowers, and a few religious icons. She offered me a chair at a small table covered with a white cloth, sat on the other side, and began shuffling a deck of cards without saying a word. I felt my hands sweating and my heart racing. When she started laying the cards on the table, I closed my eyes, not knowing if this would make any sense. After a few seconds of silence, she sighed deeply. "Your husband is distancing himself from you, but it's not his decision. Someone is interfering with bad intentions." In another time, I might have laughed or doubted, but at that moment, the pain I felt at home was too real for me to dismiss any possibility. She continued, "An invisible force is binding his heart. It's as if they've tied up the feelings that should be yours. There's a woman involved. I see an initial that could be M, or perhaps something similar." My mind immediately raced through memories, but nothing clear emerged. She explained this woman was performing rituals to make my husband indifferent to me, redirecting his affections elsewhere. She also said if I didn't act quickly, Jason could completely lose himself, forgetting what he felt for me. "Bring me a photo of him and something personal. We'll start a cleansing to neutralize this witchcraft," the spiritual worker concluded straightforwardly. I left there dazed, but also with a strange sense of hope. If this was true, there was a supernatural cause for Jason's distancing. And if there was a cause, perhaps there was a solution. The next day, when he left for work, I searched our bedroom for something of his that carried a lot of energy. A watch he had worn for years. I also took a photo of us from the day we celebrated our first wedding anniversary. In the picture, he was smiling with his arm around me. It made me miss the time when we understood each other with just a look. I returned to Ruth's house with these items. She placed the watch next to a small glass containing water and herbs that emitted a strong scent, sweet yet bitter at the same time. Then she carefully examined the photo. "This is where I'll focus," she said, passing her hand over Jason's face in the image. "I'm going to try to recover his essence because it's shrouded in mist." I paid a symbolic amount for the material she would use, and before leaving, I asked who could have done such a thing. She didn't mention names, but reiterated it was a woman close enough to have access to us. She advised me to better observe the people around me, that I trusted someone too much who didn't deserve it. On my way home, I felt a chill. I thought about colleagues, acquaintances, even neighbors who sometimes came over to chat, but none with the initial M came to mind. For a split second, I considered it might all be madness. But when I arrived and found Jason sitting on the couch, staring at his phone, I made a casual comment, and he simply didn't respond. It was like talking to a wall. The image of him being oblivious to me revived my fear, and the idea that this witchcraft could be real. That night, I decided to tell part of the story to my mother. I didn't intend to reveal everything, but I ended up opening up and crying. Instead of doubting, she shared something that caught me by surprise. "When I was young, before I married your father, I went through something similar. A man pursued me, and when he got no for an answer, he tried to bind me spiritually. I was confused and almost ended my engagement. Later, I discovered he was using a kind of spell and even putting things in my food when he visited. I got goosebumps. I had never heard this story in full. She said she sought out a healer who prayed strongly and prepared herbal baths. Soon after, she was able to free herself from this influence and resumed the engagement that eventually led to marriage with my father. That gave me a shot of courage. If my mother had managed to break free, I could too. The next morning, I received a call from Ruth asking me to return to her house, urgently. I arrived around noon. Upon entering, I saw candles burned down to the wick, burned herbs, and a saucer with a murky liquid. She showed me a red string with several tight knots. "This is what I felt when trying to cleanse your husband's energy. Each knot represents a blockage that the person behind the spell makes a point of reinforcing. I need time to undo everything." I asked her to do whatever was necessary. I just wanted my husband back. At the same time, a question hammered in my head. Who, after all, was doing this? I returned home and tried to live normally. Jason remained distant, but at some moments I noticed a slight change. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie with him, something that hadn't happened in months. Perhaps Ruth's work was having an effect. One late afternoon, we went out to buy groceries at the neighborhood market. On the way back, he held my hand for a few seconds but quickly let go, seeming confused. Still, that small gesture brought tears to my eyes. I clung to it as a sign of hope, until one morning, I woke up with a strong feeling that the name Megan had something to do with the story. I got out of bed and began scouring my memory. I remembered Megan, a woman I had worked with for a few months before being laid off. She was extroverted, loud, with a flashy style. At the time, she came to my house to console me when she found out I was unemployed. I now recalled a specific scene. She touched Jason's coffee mug before handing it to him, an almost imperceptible gesture that didn't catch my attention at the time. Everything suddenly fit together. She used the initial M and was close enough to know details about my marriage. Could she have been secretly interested in Jason? My intuition screamed that yes, she was. I told my suspicion to my mother, who, after hearing me describe the coffee mug scene, agreed it could be something strange. I returned to Ruth's house and revealed the name that came to mind. She confirmed it made sense but warned me, don't confront this person now. Just try to protect yourself and strengthen your bond with your husband. Any hasty action could make her retaliate. I agreed, but inside, my feelings were of anger and a desire for Megan to pay for all the suffering she was causing me. I mentioned this to my mother, and she said, I know a woman who does return-to-sender work, but think carefully before asking for something like that. I was overwhelmed with desperation and needed a more immediate solution, fearing Megan would reinforce the spell and I'd lose Jason forever. I asked for the contact of this woman, named Esther, who lived in a rural area of a nearby county. My mother had heard about her when seeking solutions for her past issues. I took a bus to reach the region where Esther lived, got off on a dirt road with sparse houses surrounded by low fences and twisted trees. I walked until I found the indicated dwelling, a simple brick construction with a somewhat worn wooden gate. As I approached, I heard a woman's voice. You can come in. I already know why you came. I had a chill. Esther, a middle-aged woman with long hair tied in a loose bun, received me with a firm gaze. I told a summary of what was happening. I suspected Megan had cast a spell to distance Jason from me, and the spiritual worker I consulted was doing a cleansing to break this energy. But I wanted to return the harm. Esther just nodded her head. This is called a return ritual, but be warned. When you return something bad to someone, you need to be certain there's no doubt in your heart. These rites are dangerous. I was determined. I preferred to face the risk than see my marriage destroyed. Esther explained I would need an object connecting Megan to the spell, something she had touched or used. Since Megan had been to my house other times, I remembered she once left a silver hair clip on my coffee table. At the time, I kept it not knowing how to return it. I needed to find it. I also bought from Esther some specific candles, dried herbs, and a small bottle with a grayish powder. You'll have to put this powder in her drink. It won't cause physical harm, but it will be the channel for the negative energies to return. She will reap what she sowed. I returned home divided between fear and determination. The next day, I tidied the house, seemingly wanting to organize everything. But my real goal was to find the hair clip. I searched drawers, boxes, closets, and finally found it at the bottom of a chest where I kept old clothes. I felt a chill holding it in my hands. It was silver with small crystals embedded in it. I remembered Megan wearing it the day she supposedly came to console me after my layoff. Jason gradually showed signs of improvement. Some nights he even showed affection. but he had relapses, becoming cold and distant at other times. I noticed he remained bound to something even he didn't understand. It was on a Thursday night that I received a message from Megan on my phone, saying she missed me and asking if we could meet to catch up. Despite feeling disgusted, I decided to take advantage of the opportunity. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown, a discreet place. On the agreed day, I arrived early and chose a table further back where there was less movement. When Megan arrived, I noticed she wore modern clothes, hair tied in a high ponytail, bold lipstick. Smiling, she hugged me as if we were old friends. I almost felt nauseated, but pretended to be calm. I asked her to sit down. "You disappeared, Sarah." "How's life?" she asked, picking up the menu. I replied with a sigh, saying things were difficult. I talked about problems I was facing, without going into details about the witchcraft. She smiled compassionately, but there was something in her gaze that made me uncomfortable. She seemed curious, as if wanting to know if the witchcraft was really having an effect. I took the opportunity to ask how she was, and vaguely, she said she was excited about new projects. I kept an eye on her cup, waiting for the chance to use the powder. She ordered a latte, and I ordered plain coffee. While the waiter was serving, I was tense, imagining how to pour the contents of the small bottle into her drink without her noticing. We kept talking about mundane matters. At one point, I pretended I needed to fix something in my purse, and in a quick movement, I opened the bottle and threw a small amount into her coffee. It was a matter of 2 seconds. When I returned my attention to her, Megan was looking sideways at a couple passing by, not paying attention to me. She took a few sips and continued talking. My breathing was labored, my heart racing, but I tried to stay calm. After about 20 minutes, I claimed I needed to leave, saying I felt a bit nauseous. She got up too, and then gave me a tight hug. It was inevitable to feel a chill, as if something passed through me. She whispered, "If you need anything, let me know." I agreed, smiling without showing my teeth. As I left, I walked through busy streets until I reached the bus stop. My body was shaking, and I mentally repeated what Esther had said. The powder doesn't do physical harm. It just returns the bad energy. I tried to convince myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, just defending myself, but something in me hurt. It wasn't total regret, but a wait for entering this game of revenge. Arriving home, I found Jason sitting at the table, leafing through a newspaper. He asked me how my day had been, something he hadn't done in a long time. It was a relief to see that interest. We talked a bit, and he even laughed at a silly joke I made. Later, while we were washing dishes, he asked if I wanted to watch a comedy movie on TV. I almost cried with emotion at seeing that return to routine, however small. In the following days, Jason became more attentive. He went back to hugging me before sleep, complimenting my breakfast. He seemed to be freeing himself from a mist that hovered over him. One weekend, he invited me to the park, where we used to go at the beginning of our marriage. We walked hand in hand, bought coconut water, and sat on a bench watching people pass by. I could barely remember the last time we had done that. It was like reliving a good part of the past. About 2 weeks after the meeting with Megan, she began calling me insistently. I didn't answer the calls. I received messages from her saying she was desperate, that she needed to talk to me. I ignored everything. Jason asked who was calling so much, and when I said it was Megan, he frowned as if trying to remember something unpleasant. I don't really like her. I don't know why, but I just don't want you to get hurt. That phrase unsettled me. He seemed to have some negative memory related to her, even without concrete evidence. I started blocking the calls and messages. Megan even showed up once at my door, but I said I wouldn't open it. After that, she disappeared for a while. It came to my ears, through mutual acquaintances, that Megan was going through serious problems. She lost her job, had disagreements with relatives, and her boyfriend ended the relationship. It seemed everything around her was crumbling. I remembered what Esther said about bad energy returning. I had a mixture of relief and guilt. On one hand, I felt it was a consequence of the harm she did to me. On the other, I couldn't really rejoice in someone's misfortune. Yet each day, Jason seemed more solid and affectionate. We returned to dialoguing about household tasks and made plans to maybe one day move to a bigger place. He even mentioned wanting to have children, something that wasn't even discussed in previous months. I still carried the doubt if, during the coldest period of our relationship, Jason had been romantically involved with Megan. One quiet night, I found the courage and asked. He hesitated, was silent for a few seconds, and finally confessed. She would show up at my work, bringing lunch and asking how we were doing. She seemed concerned about us. We went out twice for dinner, but something told me not to go beyond that. I didn't feel anger at that moment, but a pang of sadness. He affirmed, looking me in the eyes, I didn't do anything that could hurt you beyond accepting to talk with her. But when I tried to think about our history, I felt trapped. I can't explain it. It was like I was in another world, not clearly seeing my feelings. I tried to swallow the crying and the urge to scream at him, but I realized that in a way, he too had been a victim of something that confused him. I felt mixed pity and anger. I spent the night reliving each moment of distancing, remembering how I felt alone, abandoned. But the next day, when I woke up and saw him sleeping beside me, I understood he was there, within my reach, and now everything tended to improve. Weeks later, I received a call from Esther. I was surprised because I didn't imagine she would contact me. She said I felt a shift in energy. Your rival is trying to free herself from the return. Stay alert, that scared me. That night I slept poorly, dreamed of knocks on my door, voices whispering my name. I woke up in a cold sweat. Jason asked if I was okay, and I said it was just a nightmare. He hugged me tight, and we stayed like that until the day cleared. A few normal days passed until one Saturday morning. I ran into Megan by chance at the neighborhood supermarket. I was distracted looking at vegetables when I saw her briefly, head down, thin, with deep circles under her eyes. She saw me and approached hesitantly. I confess my instinct was to turn around and flee, but I ended up staying. She spoke softly. Sarah, I need to talk. It can be quick. We went to an empty aisle. She lowered her gaze and whispered, I don't know what's happening to me. Everything went wrong. I just wanted to apologize. I didn't imagine things would take this proportion. My heart was beating fast. She didn't openly admit she did witchcraft, but she made it clear something was out of control. I saw her hands trembling on the shopping cart. She seemed desperate, She said she was looking for help, but all paths seemed closed. I didn't know what to respond. I felt anger and pity at the same time. She pleaded, "Please, if you know of anything that can get me out of this, tell me." I took a deep breath. I wanted to scream, to say she had destroyed my peace. But in the end, I only replied that I had nothing to offer, that she should look for another path and stay away from me and Jason. She agreed with tears in her eyes and walked away pushing her cart. She didn't look back. I felt weak in the knees. I had to hold onto a shelf, not to fall. I arrived home and told everything to Jason. He hugged me, saying he understood how much that shook me. We talked about whether we should alert Ruth or Esther about this encounter. But we decided it wasn't worth prolonging the matter. We wanted to live in peace without extending that dark chapter. The weeks went by peacefully. Jason became increasingly participative in household routines, asking about my plans, if I wanted to resume some professional project. Gradually, I relaxed. I no longer had such frequent nightmares. Megan's name was left behind. There was still a trace of fear that she would appear again, but I tried not to cultivate it. On a late afternoon, I did a general cleaning of the house and found a box where I kept objects related to what I'd been through. Inside were some dried herbs left over from Ruth's prayers, and a piece of string with 3 knots she had shown me. I held that string carefully and felt a chill, remembering how each knot represented a blockage in Jason's mind and heart. I decided I needed to definitively end this cycle. I went to the backyard, lit a small fire in an old metal bucket we had, and threw the string in there. I watched the flames consuming it until only ashes remained. That night when Jason arrived, I told him what I had done. He smiled and said, "I feel like we're finally free of all this." He took from his wallet a crumpled little card with Esther's contact information and tore it into small pieces. "We don't need this kind of help anymore. It was useful, but now let's stay just with the strength we've built with each other." We had dinner in silence, but with a feeling of lightness. Afterward, we sat on the porch to talk about trivial things. A renovation we wanted to do in the living room. A trip to a mountainous region we had been planning for a long time. The desire to resume old hobbies. It was the normal life I wanted back so badly. Not long after, I received news that Megan had left the city. They said she went to a distant region, seeking to start over. I didn't try to confirm. For me, it was enough to know she wouldn't appear at my door anymore. I talked with my mother about everything we lived through. She told me she prayed for me, asking that this whole story would end without tragedy. I thanked her and assured her that Jason and I were fine, strengthened, and ready to move forward. Today, when I look back, I feel a mixture of sadness for the suffering I experienced and gratitude for having overcome it. I don't like to tell details to everyone because many people don't believe in witchcraft or think it's superstition. But I know what I saw and what I felt. Jason's coldness, the sensation of being suffocated by negative energies, the desperation that made me resort to means I never imagined using. If I took any lesson from all this, it's that we need to care for what we love every day. Evil can enter through gaps we leave open, either through distraction or naivety. And I also understood that you don't play with invisible forces. In my case, I found help and was lucky enough to recover my marriage. There are those who can't and lose what they value most in life. Jason and I continue living in the same city. We still think about having children in the future, and God willing, we'll build a family full of love and respect. Every now and then, I take the photo from our first wedding anniversary and remember how happy we were. Today, I believe we've managed to recover that essence. There were some scars, of course, but they remind us that love and faith, or whatever moves us, can overcome even the darkest influence. My only advice to those going through something similar is never to underestimate the signs. If the relationship changes drastically without explanation, if there are strange dreams, a feeling of heaviness in the air, don't ignore it. Seek help, be it medical, psychological, or spiritual. The worst mistake is pretending nothing is happening. Sometimes what we call coincidences are actually indications of something hidden surrounding us. Currently, I rarely find myself thinking about Megan. Whether she freed herself from the consequences, I don't know. I only wish she doesn't try to ruin anyone else's life again. As for me, I remain strong, grateful to be able to talk with Jason about any subject, without feeling that wall of indifference that almost drove me crazy. And to finally close this story, I leave it recorded that, although many people doubt it, there are forces that escape our control and can be used for both good and evil. The boundary between the natural and supernatural may be thinner than we imagine. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive the next stories. Your presence is important, and your support is essential. Well, let's continue. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.